A millionaire gets a hug by mistake from a poor girl and discovers true love. The Chicago train station was packed that late afternoon. The sound of loudspeakers announcing arrivals and departures mixed with the buzz of hurried footsteps and hasty goodbyes. Lily Thompson held the phone tightly, her heart racing, her eyes scanning the crowd in front of her. "Lucas said he's already got off the train," she muttered to herself, looking again at the message her cousin had sent minutes before. The trains came and went, and she kept looking. Lily never liked crowded places, but she couldn't afford to wait elsewhere. Lucas was coming from Milwaukee to help her with Noah for a few months. Her younger brother, only 14, had fallen ill again, and the thought of facing that situation alone once more made her want to fall apart. Then she saw it. In the middle of the crowd, a tall man in a dark suit was walking towards her. He had his back to her, and something about the way he walked, the familiar posture, made Lily's heart soar with relief. Without a second thought, she ran towards him, opening an excited smile. "Lucas!" she exclaimed, throwing her arms around him in a tight hug. The impact of the gesture took the man by surprise. His body stiffened and his arms remained motionless at his sides. For a brief moment, Lily felt the strong beat of his heart against her face, the cool texture of the luxury suit under her fingers. But before she could say anything, the man grabbed her shoulders and gently pulled her away. "I think you have me confused with someone else." His voice was deep, low, laden with a polite coldness. Lily froze. She lifted her face and finally saw. He wasn't Lucas, not by a long shot. The eyes that stared at her were an intense blue, sharp as razors. His strong jaw was clenched, and his well-fitted dark suit made him look like one of those unapproachable executives she saw in the newspapers. His face turned red with embarrassment. "God, I'm sorry. I thought you were my cousin." The man blinked slowly, as if analyzing her every detail. Lily wanted to disappear. She'd never been one to do that sort of thing, let alone hug a stranger in the middle of a train station. "It happens." He straightened his suit, taking a step back. "I hope you find the right person." He said it in a calculated, almost indifferent way, but he didn't look away from her for a few seconds longer than necessary. And then, without saying another word, he turned and disappeared into the crowd. Lily stood there, trying to calm her racing heart. Shame was still burning her cheeks when she finally spotted Lucas coming in the opposite direction. "Lily, sorry, the train was a bit late delivering my suitcase." "You won't believe what just happened." Lucas raised an eyebrow, but before she could tell him, his phone vibrated, a message from Noah. "Lily, where are you? Are you going to be long?" Relief turned to instant worry. She saved the story for later. Now the focus was on Noah. Days later, Lily's life was a succession of tiredness and worries. Her salary as a children's art teacher barely covered the basic bills, and Noah's medical expenses were only increasing. He needed urgent surgery, and the amount was something she would never be able to raise. That's why when she received a temporary invitation to work as a guide at the city's art museum, she accepted without hesitation. The pay wasn't much, but it was extra. That evening, a charity event was to take place at the museum, and Lily was to guide a select group of guests through a special exhibition. Rich people who never had to count pennies to pay for medical treatment, she thought bitterly. In a simple but elegant dress, she adjusted the clipboard in her hands and entered the main room, forcing a professional smile. And then she stopped midway. There he was, the man from the station, the cold-eyed billionaire. He was standing back, talking to other men in suits, holding a glass of champagne indifferently. But Lily knew it was him. She would never forget that presence. Her heart raced. What was he doing there? Was he one of the event's sponsors? As if sensing her gaze, the man turned his head slightly, his blue eyes landing directly on hers. His expression was impassive, but Lily saw a flash of recognition in his gaze. And then he smiled. A subtle smile. A dangerous smile. The kind of smile that said, "Now you owe me an explanation." Lily swallowed. What did that man want? Her stomach churned. What was Ethan Sinclair doing there? The room was crowded, lit by crystal chandeliers and decorated with works of art that Lily knew were worth more than anything she had ever owned in her life. But nothing there caught her attention more than those blue eyes fixed on her. The charity event was to raise funds for art programs for underprivileged children, but Lily knew that for most of the millionaires there, it was just another night to show off their status. She tried to look away, to act as if she hadn't noticed him, but something in her knew that it would be impossible to ignore him. And she was right. Just a few minutes later, as she was preparing to start the exhibition presentation, she felt a presence beside her. The woody, sophisticated scent invaded her senses before she even turned around. "Do you always hug strangers, or was I an exception?" The voice was low, laden with an amused tone, but there was something else behind it. Something calculated. Lily turned slowly and found Ethan just a few centimeters away from her. He held a glass of champagne nonchalantly, but his gaze was sharp, assessing her every reaction. Her heart raced. "I already apologized for that," she mumbled, crossing her arms, trying to disguise her nervousness. "Yes, and I accepted. But now you owe me a story. Why exactly did you think I was someone else?" Lily pressed her lips together. "What did he want with this conversation? Was he having fun at your expense?" "I was waiting for my cousin at the station. He said he'd arrived and I saw your back and... well, I was wrong." Ethan tilted his head slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Does your cousin wear $5,000 suits?" Lily felt her face heat up. "I only caught a glimpse," she said quickly. "And, for your information, some people don't judge others by the clothes they wear." "That's an interesting answer." "Say it's the only answer I can give you." He smiled sideways as if he was enjoying the conversation. "And now you work here?" "Temporarily," she replied, looking at the guests around her, trying to remember that she was there for a job. "I'm an art teacher, but I accepted this opportunity because I needed the extra money." Ethan watched her for a moment, as if putting together pieces of an invisible puzzle. "Do you like art?" Lily blinked. "Yes, a lot." He smiled again, but this time there was something different in his gaze, something Lily couldn't decipher. "So I'm curious to hear your explanation of the pieces on display." Before Lily could answer, the event coordinator called her over, asking her to start the presentation. With one last look at Ethan, she took a deep breath and made her way to the center of the room. With every word she said about the paintings and sculptures on display, she felt more comfortable. This was her comfort zone. She talked about the artists, their inspirations, the techniques used. For a moment she forgot that she was surrounded by millionaires who probably weren't even listening. But when her eyes found Ethan in the crowd, she realized that he was listening. He wasn't just watching her, he was studying her. And Lily felt a shiver run up her spine. The night wore on, and after she'd finished her work, she sought a secluded corner to breathe. The weight of responsibility, the bills piling up, the worry about Noah, everything seemed to squeeze her chest at once. But then, as if waiting for the right moment, Ethan appeared again. "You talk about art as if it were something personal." Lily sighed. "Because it is." "Do you paint?" "I used to. Now I don't have time for it." Ethan watched her for a moment. "Because you're busy with something more important." She didn't answer. He didn't need to know about her problems. He didn't need to know that every penny he earned went towards his brother's medical costs. But Ethan Sinclair didn't seem the type to take silence for an answer. "Your gaze changes when you talk about art," he continued, as if thinking out loud. "There's passion, but there's also pain." Lily swallowed. "Do you always analyze people like that?" He smiled slightly. "Only when something intrigues me." She felt her heart racing again. Before she could answer, the event coordinator interrupted. "Lily, we have a problem at reception. Can you help us?" She nodded quickly, grateful for the distraction, and walked away before Ethan could say anything else. But he didn't take his eyes off her, and Lily knew it. That wouldn't be the last time Ethan Sinclair crossed her path. The week passed in a blur of worries. Noah had gotten worse, and the doctors were increasingly insistent about the need for surgery. But where would Lily find $20,000? She tried everything. She campaigned online, asked NGOs for help, but time was against them. Noah was weak. He tried to smile so as not to worry her, but Lily could see the pain in his eyes. And then, an unexpected phone call changed everything. "Good afternoon, Miss Thompson," said a firm voice on the other end of the line. My name is Alexander Reed. I work for Ethan Sinclair. Lily froze. How did you get my number? Mr. Sinclair would like to make an appointment to discuss a matter of mutual interest. Her heart started beating faster. What are you talking about? He prefers to discuss it in person. Can you meet him tomorrow at 8 in the evening at the Skyview Lounge? Lily felt her stomach turn. The Skyview Lounge was a luxurious restaurant at the top of one of Chicago's tallest buildings, a place she could never afford to set foot in. Why? Mr. Sinclair believes he has a proposal that might interest you. Lily bit her lip. Something inside her told her this was a mistake, but she had no choice. Ethan Sinclair wanted to see her, and she had to find out why. The Skyview Lounge restaurant glowed at the top of the skyscraper, its panoramic windows revealing an endless sea of Chicago lights. Lily had never set foot in a place like it. The smell of expensive spices and fine wines filled the air as waiters glided through the lounge, serving artfully assembled dishes. Every detail screamed wealth, luxury, and exclusivity, and she felt completely out of place. Her fingers tightened on the strap of her handbag, as if it would stop her from running away. She should never have accepted that invitation. Ethan Sinclair was not of her world. He was a powerful, calculating man, and now he wanted a private meeting. To discuss what? A waiter led her to a reserved table near the windows, and there he was. Ethan Sinclair was sitting with the same impeccable posture, a dark suit perfectly tailored to his body, his hair slightly disheveled in a way that seemed almost purposeful. His blue gaze landed on her as soon as he approached, analyzing her with the same unsettling intensity that made her feel vulnerable. He stood up politely but without losing his cool. Lily. He said her name as if it were a riddle he hadn't yet deciphered. She took a deep breath and sat down. I'm not used to this kind of place, she admitted, before he had a chance to comment. I see, she raised her eyebrows. And yet you called me here. Because I want to understand you. Lily felt a shiver run up her spine. Do you always do that? Call random women to lavish dinners to study them as an experiment? The corner of his mouth curved up slightly. I don't usually call anyone to dinners, actually. And why me? He leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on the table. Because you intrigue me. Her heart pounded, but she kept her expression neutral. That doesn't answer my question. He sighed, running his hand over his chin, as if choosing his words carefully. I'm not a man used to genuine human connections. Lily frowned. Is that a very sophisticated way of saying you don't have any friends? Ethan let out a small laugh, short and without warmth. Something like that. I grew up learning that feelings were weakness, that trusting people was a risk. But then, out of nowhere, a woman comes up and hugs me in a train station, and that it was real. She blinked in surprise. It was a mistake. And yet, it was the most genuine moment I've had in years. Lily didn't know what to say. Something about him seemed sincere, but at the same time, so far removed from her reality that it was difficult to process. You called me here just to talk about it. He was silent for a moment, then picked up a black envelope and placed it on the table. No, I also have a proposal for you. Lily hesitated before taking the envelope. When she opened it, she saw a check inside. $20,000. Her stomach churned. What? What is that? Ethan crossed his fingers on the table. It's the money you need for your brother's surgery. She felt the air escape from her lungs. How do you know that? I did some research. Lily felt cold. You investigated my life? I needed to understand why a woman like you would take on extra work at a charity event. The reason became clear. Lily felt the anger growing inside her. That's invasive. It may be, but I want to help. She pushed the check back at him. I'm not a charity. His eyes sparkled. I know, that's why I'm offering you a trade. She hesitated. What kind of exchange? He leaned in again, his gaze fixed on hers. I want you to work for me for a month. Lily felt her heart race. Doing what? I collect art, but I've never understood anything about what I buy. They're just investments for me. I want you to teach me to see what I've never seen. She laughed incredulously. You want to pay me $20,000 to talk to you about paintings? Exactly. She shook her head. That doesn't make sense. Ethan leaned back in his chair. I like to test boundaries. Mine, yours. If you accept, you'll have the money you need and a month to prove to me that art isn't just a business. Lily felt the weight of the decision on her shoulders. The obvious answer would have been to say no, refuse, and walk out of that restaurant. But then, the image of Noah flashed through her mind. If she said no, would he have a chance? Swallowing dryly, she looked into Ethan's eyes. 1 month, and then you pay me that amount for my brother's surgery. Now, you keep your check. I'm not taking it yet, he smiled. 1 month. And at that moment, without knowing it, Lily had just changed her life forever. The first day at work was a shock. Ethan lived in a luxurious penthouse where the walls were lined with paintings worth millions, but to him they were just expensive objects. What do you feel when you look at this painting? Lily asked, pointing to a canvas of vibrant colors. Ethan watched her for a moment. That I've spent too much money. She rolled her eyes. That's not how it works. Then teach me. The days passed between intense discussions, long conversations, and unexpectedly intimate moments. Lily began to see layers in Ethan that she had never imagined existed. He wasn't just cold and calculating. He carried invisible scars, fears that he never admitted out loud. And the most dangerous? Lily began to care. But then the phone rang. It was Lucas. Lily, you need to come now. Fear took hold of her. What's happened? It's Noah. He fainted. The ground seemed to disappear from under his feet. Ethan noticed the change in her expression immediately. What's wrong? Lily looked at him, her heart racing. I have to go. And before she could think twice, Ethan was already reaching for the car keys. Let's go. And at that moment, Lily realized that she wasn't alone. But fate still had surprises in store for her. The road looked like a blur before Lily's eyes. Every beat of her heart pulsed like a drum beaten by panic. The city lights passed quickly, but still not quickly enough. She held her phone tightly, waiting for any new message from Lucas, but the screen remained dark. Ethan was driving next to her, one hand firmly on the steering wheel, the other resting on the gear shift. He didn't say anything, just accelerated. Say something. Her voice sounded shakier than he expected. He kept his eyes on the road. He'll be fine, Lily wanted to believe, but fear burned inside her. Noah had been showing symptoms of weakness for weeks. The surgery was urgent, but she needed time. Now it seemed that time had run out. The hospital loomed ahead like a beacon in the middle of the night. As soon as Ethan stopped the car, Lily ran out. The cold air cut into her skin, but she didn't feel it. Her feet barely touched the ground as she ran through the double doors of the emergency room. The sight of Lucas waiting for her in the corridor made her stomach turn. Where is he? They're doing tests. He collapsed in the kitchen and hit his head. The world around her spun. He hit his head? It was a small cut. But that's not the problem, Lily. The doctors said his heart is weaker than they thought. They want to do the surgery immediately. The air disappeared from her lungs. But... Lucas bit his lip, his eyes full of guilt. They said they'd try to stabilize him until tomorrow, but after that... Lily felt despair tighten her throat. There was no more time. It was then that she felt Ethan's presence beside her. She had completely forgotten about him. When she turned to face him, his gaze was unreadable, but his posture conveyed absolute control. Who's the doctor in charge? Lucas blinked, confused. Dr. Carter. Ethan stepped forward. I want to talk to him now. Lily frowned. Ethan, what are you... He looked at her, his expression serious. I said I wanted to help. That wasn't a formality. Lily felt her eyes sting. I can't accept that. Can't or won't. She opened her mouth to reply, but nothing came out. Ethan turned and walked down the corridor. Lily felt her legs falter. Lucas grabbed her arm. Who is this guy? Lily took a deep breath. Someone I still don't fully understand, but I'm doing extra work for him. The next few minutes were a blur. Ethan talked to Dr. Carter, signed documents that Lily didn't even have time to read, and suddenly everything was happening. Noah would be operated on at dawn. Lily sat in a chair in the hallway, her body too tired to react. Ethan stopped next to her, shoving his hands in his pockets. "Now you can breathe." She looked up at him, feeling a wave of conflicting emotions. "Why are you doing this?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled out a chair and sat down next to her, leaning forward slightly. "Because I can." She wanted to believe that it was just that. But there was something deeper in his eyes. Something she didn't understand. "You don't know my brother. You don't know me. I'm getting to know you." Silence fell between them. Then he broke the distance, his voice low, almost a whisper. "When I was 10, my mother spent months in hospital. My father could afford the best doctors, but he was never there. Her money paid the bills, but it didn't hold her hand." Lily remained motionless. Ethan looked away, his jaw tense. "I watched my mother die alone." Lily's heart squeezed. "Ethan." He let out a humorless laugh. "I don't need pity. I just want you to understand. I know that money doesn't solve everything, but I know what it's like to look at someone you love and not be able to do anything about it." Tears threatened to overflow from her eyes. "Thank you." Her voice came out hoarse. He nodded slightly. "You need to rest." She shook her head. "I can't leave." "Then at least have some coffee." Before she could protest, Ethan was already on his feet, walking down the corridor. Lily watched him walk away, feeling that she had just seen a side of him that few people knew. And for the first time, she realized that Ethan Sinclair wasn't just a cold, powerful man. He was a man who, perhaps, was also trying to find a reason to believe in something bigger than numbers and business. Dawn came too quickly. Lily held Noah's hand, while nurses prepared the stretcher to take him to surgery. Her brother's face looked even paler under the fluorescent lights, but he gave her a weak smile. "There's no need to cry, Lily. I'll be back soon." She squeezed his hand. "You're the bravest person I know." He blinked slowly. "I learned from you." Tears escaped before she could hold them back. Lucas hugged her as they took Noah away. Time seemed to drag on. Lily walked down the corridor, unable to sit down. Ethan was there, discreet, but present. Even he didn't understand why he was there with someone he had only known for such a short time. Hours passed. Then the operating room door opened, Dr. Carter came out, and Lily felt her heart stop. The surgery had been a success. Relief came like an overwhelming wave. And without thinking, without hesitating, Lily turned and threw her arms around Ethan. It was a different hug from the first. This time, he reciprocated. She felt his chest rise and fall against her face, the warmth of his hands holding her tight. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. Lily was still holding Ethan, feeling the unexpected warmth of his arms around her. But then she realized. Her heart wasn't just racing with relief. There was something else there, something that shouldn't be happening. She slowly pulled away, her eyes meeting his. For a moment, neither of them said anything. The silence seemed full of unspoken words, of something that hung between them, uncomfortable and undeniable. Ethan opened his mouth to say something, but before he could speak, Dr. Carter's voice interrupted them. "Lily, can we talk for a moment?" She blinked, forcing herself out of that strange trance, and nodded. Ethan stood there, watching her follow the doctor down the corridor. But what he didn't know was that when Lily came out of that conversation, nothing would ever be the same again. The silence in the hospital corridor was heavy, and Ethan couldn't take his eyes off Lily as she followed Dr. Carter. Something inside him stirred, a feeling he couldn't name. All his life he had avoided emotional connections, but now he felt an emptiness when she wasn't around. Lily returned a few minutes later, her face visibly relieved. "He's fine. We just need to monitor him for the next few weeks." Ethan nodded, feeling a tension he hadn't even realized was there dissipate inside him. He wanted to say something more, but Lucas approached and hugged Lily. "I'm going to stay here tonight. You need to rest." Lily hesitated, but Ethan intervened. "Lucas is right. You've been up all night." She bit her lip, looking torn. "I don't know. I'll take you home," Ethan said without thinking. Lily blinked in surprise. "You?" He just stared at her, waiting for her answer. She took a deep breath and finally nodded. The drive to Lily's apartment was silent. Ethan drove with his eyes fixed on the road, but his mind was far away. He didn't understand why he wanted to be near her. Perhaps it was the way she always put others before herself, or the strength with which she faced everything, even when the world seemed to be falling apart. When they arrived, Lily hesitated at the door. "Would you like to come in?" Ethan hadn't expected the invitation, but before he could think of an answer, she opened the door, and he followed her inside. The apartment was small and simple, but it had something that most places he'd never been to had: coziness. It was a space that felt like home. She went to make herself a coffee. The smell hung in the air, and there were canvases and brushes spread out on a table by the window. "You really paint," Ethan murmured, looking at the unfinished canvases. Lily smiled slightly, the first genuine smile he'd seen on her since Noah had been admitted. Not as much as before, but yes. Ethan looked around, absorbing every detail: the worn sofa, the books stacked in a corner, the pictures on the wall, photos of Lily and Noah, real smiles full of love. Something tightened inside him. "Would you like some coffee?" Lily asked, pulling him out of his thoughts. He would never accept coffee anywhere else. He didn't like coffee that much. But there, with her, he just nodded. Lily disappeared into the kitchen, and Ethan approached the painting table. There was an unfinished drawing of Noah and Lily together, the strokes delicate, almost full of life. He had never known an atmosphere like it. He had never felt such genuine love after his mother passed away. When Lily returned with the steaming cups, she found Ethan looking at the drawings. "Noah paints too?" She smiled, pulling out a chair to sit down. "Yes, he's a natural. I've always encouraged him, but over the last few months, with everything that's happened, he's put it to one side." Ethan picked up his cup, smelling the strong coffee. "Maybe now he can come back." Lily's eyes softened. "I hope so." Ethan didn't know why he didn't want to leave, but something in him told him that if he left, he would miss the place. The following days brought changes he would never have expected. Noah recovered well, and Lily made a point of repaying everything Ethan had done. At first it was with small gestures, like an impromptu dinner in his apartment, even though she knew he was used to fancy restaurants. But soon it turned into something more. Ethan found himself spending more time in that small apartment than in his own mansion. He liked the way Lily made everything seem simple. He liked the unfiltered conversations. He liked the way Noah, even though he was still weak, smiled at him as if he saw him in a way no one else did. Then, one day, Noah handed him something. "This is for you." Ethan looked at the envelope, confused. Lily watched from afar, her eyes full of anticipation. He opened the envelope and found a drawing. It was him. Ethan was sitting on the edge of the hospital, looking out of the window, lost in thought. Noah had captured every detail: the distant eyes, the rigid posture, the perfectly tailored suit, contrasting with the hidden sadness in his eyes. And below the drawing, a single sentence: "You taught me that there are angels on earth." Ethan swallowed. Never in his entire life had someone given him something like this, something so genuine. His fingers tightened on the paper, and he looked at Noah. The boy was smiling at him, with the innocence of someone who really believed what he had written, and it was at that moment that Ethan realized once again. He had never felt this kind of love before, and he didn't know how to deal with it. That night, while Lily took Noah to bed, Ethan stayed in the living room holding the drawing. Lily came back and found him standing there, still looking at the paper, as if it was something precious. "Are you all right?" He looked up at her. "This has never happened to me before." "What has?" "That, being important to someone for real. I'm always surrounded by self-interested people. I helped Noah, but I feel like I got the most out of it." Lily felt a lump in her throat. "You're important." Ethan looked away, and for a moment Lily saw something she had never seen in him before: vulnerability. In that instant, she understood that Ethan Sinclair, the most powerful man she had ever met, was also the loneliest. And without thinking, without planning, she reached out and took his hand. He looked at their joined hands, then at her face, and then, slowly, he squeezed her hand back. The connection between them was undeniable, but neither of them was ready to admit what it meant. Not yet. Ethan began to appear more frequently. Lily realized that he no longer minded the simplicity of her home. On the contrary, he seemed to like the peace the place brought. Noah started painting again, encouraged by Lily and surprisingly by Ethan too. Lucas, who had previously planned to return to Milwaukee, received an unexpected proposal from Ethan. "You have a good instinct for business. Why don't you work for me?" Lucas was shocked. "Is this serious?" "I don't make proposals that aren't serious." Lily watched the scene in surprise. Lucas looked at her, and then at Noah, who was smiling excitedly. "If I accept, I can stay here. Help Lily and Noah." Ethan just nodded, and so another change took place. More and more, something grew between Ethan and Lily, something that neither of them wanted to face yet. Until one night, everything changed. Ethan was about to leave when Lily called him at the door. "Ethan." He turned around. She hesitated for a second. Then she took a deep breath and said the words that had been burning inside her for days. "Stay." His eyes lit up, and in that instant, he knew. He was lost. Completely lost in her. The silence between them was charged with something Lily couldn't explain. Her own breathing seemed too loud, her heart hammering at an unbridled pace. Ethan stared at her as if trying to understand what those words meant. Perhaps because, like her, he didn't know either. But what Lily did know, what she felt at that moment, was that she didn't want him to leave. Not that night. Not again. Ethan took a deep breath, looking away as if he were fighting something inside him. But then, slowly, he closed the door behind him and stayed. Lily didn't know what would happen from then on, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid to find out. The apartment was silent, and the tension between them grew by the second. Ethan took a step forward, and then another until he was right next to Lily. She could smell the woody scent of his perfume, the heat emanating from his body. Every muscle inside her was tense, as if she knew something was about to happen. He raised one of his hands slowly, brushing his fingers along the side of her face, tracing the outline of her skin as if he were memorizing every detail. Lily closed her eyes for a second, absorbing that soft touch, her heart hammering in her chest. "I thought," she started to say, but her voice failed her. "Don't think," Ethan whispered. And then, without hesitation, he kissed her. It was an intense kiss, full of restrained desire, as if they had both been waiting for this moment for a long time without admitting it. Ethan held her tightly, pulling her close, as if he didn't want to let her go. Lily felt the world around her disappear, every thought swallowed up by the feel of his lips on hers. She reciprocated without thinking, feeling her heartbeat quicken under her shirt. Ethan deepened the kiss, his hands gripping her waist with a touch that was both firm and delicate. Lily felt a shiver run down her spine as he slid his fingers down her back. But then, when air became essential, they pulled apart just enough to look at each other. Ethan's eyes were dark, intense, and Lily felt her legs falter. She laughed awkwardly, still feeling her skin tingle. "Do you want something to eat?" she asked, trying to regain control of herself. Ethan blinked, surprised by the question, and then let out a low laugh. "After that, do you want to talk about food?" Lily shrugged, her face hot. "I'm hungry." He watched her for a moment, then shook his head, still smiling. "That's fine. Show me what you've got." They went into the kitchen and Lily opened the fridge, biting her lip. "Well, nothing fancy. I think a sandwich will do." Ethan leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "As long as you're doing it with me, anything will do." She looked at him for a moment, and the way he said those words made her heart leap unexpectedly. She picked up the bread and started sorting the ingredients, but before she could reach for the knife to cut the tomatoes, Ethan approached from behind, placing his hands beside her on the counter, trapping her between his arms. "You didn't tell me how to help," he murmured close to her ear. His warmth against her back made Lily shiver. She picked up the tomato and handed it to him, trying to disguise the effect his closeness had on her. "Start by slicing this." Ethan took the tomato, but instead of going straight to work, he leaned over slightly and kissed her neck. Lily held her breath. "Ethan." "Yes?" he asked with a smile in his voice. She closed her eyes, feeling her heart race. "If you keep doing this, we'll never eat." He laughed softly, then walked away, picking up the knife to cut the tomato. For a moment, Lily tried to focus on the food. But every time they moved in the cramped kitchen, they ended up touching. Their arms brushed, their gazes met. With each passing second, the tension grew. When Lily reached for the cheese in the fridge and turned around, she found Ethan standing very close, watching her with that intense gaze again. She couldn't resist. She threw her arms around his neck and pulled him in for another kiss. This time, it was slower, deeper. And as they lost themselves in each other, the sandwich forgotten on the counter, Lily realized that perhaps she had never felt anything so right in her life. The kiss deepened with every second, as if everything around them had ceased to exist. But then, Noah's bedroom door opened, and they both heard from the kitchen and hurried apart. Noah appeared in the kitchen, rubbing his sleepy eyes. "What are you doing?" Lily blinked a few times, trying to come up with a coherent answer, while Ethan cleared his throat and straightened his suit as if he was getting back into control. "Just preparing something to eat," Lily said quickly, pointing to the forgotten ingredients on the counter. Noah yawned and looked at them both suspiciously. "I know." Ethan turned to Lily and smiled sideways. "I think we should actually finish this." Lily laughed and went back to assembling the sandwiches, now under the curious gaze of Noah, who sat down at the table. And that's how the evening ended, with the three of them eating together in the small kitchen, exchanging laughs and stories, as if they were a family. And maybe in a way they already were. The days passed and Ethan and Lily became inseparable. What had once seemed like a distant world was now part of their routine. Ethan, who had once been just a cold and unapproachable businessman, now spent entire afternoons in Lily's small apartment, helping Noah with paintings, listening to Lucas's stories about his childhood with his cousin, and, above all, discovering what it really meant to be part of a family. He no longer saw himself as just a visitor. He belonged there. Lily had changed too. She no longer saw Ethan as that unreachable businessman she had met at the train station. He was just Ethan, the man who held her hand when she was anxious, who made her breakfast awkwardly on Sundays, who looked at her as if she was the only thing that really mattered. But as their lives fell into place almost perfectly, the eyes of high society began to fall on Ethan. The comments were discreet at first, little whispers at events, articles insinuating that he was off his rocker ever since he started being seen with Lily. But soon, the judgments came harder. Associates and investors began to question him. Friends of the elite commented in mocking tones about his new life. And then Victoria Hawthorne, his ex-fiancée, started calling again. At first, Ethan ignored it, but the calls continued. Victoria was insistent. She knew she had lost Ethan, but she wouldn't accept being replaced. Lily didn't want to be jealous, but when she saw Victoria's picture in a magazine, she felt a tightness in her chest. The woman was stunning. Tall, elegant, always dressed in exclusive designer clothes. Ethan's ex-fiancée was the kind of person who suited him. And Lily? She looked in the mirror that night, and for the first time, felt afraid. Ethan noticed. He always did. He found her sitting in the living room staring absent-mindedly at an art book, but her thoughts clearly far away. He came over and sat down next to her, slipping an arm around her waist. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice low and attentive. Lily hesitated before answering. "I saw a photo of Victoria today." Ethan took a deep breath, understanding exactly where this was going. And she's beautiful, sophisticated, the kind of woman who belongs in your world." He frowned. "Do you think I care about that?" Lily looked at him, her eyes full of doubt. "Maybe I don't, but I do care. Not about her, but about what people say, about me, about us." Ethan held her face between his hands, his blue eyes fixed on hers with an overwhelming intensity. "I've lived in this world. I've seen what it has to offer. And, Lily, I've never been happy there." She felt her heart race. "Ethan," he smiled slightly, sliding his hand into his jacket pocket. "I was going to wait longer. I wanted to do it in a more elaborate way. But if you have any doubts about what I want, I think it's best to sort it out now." Lily frowned, confused, until she saw the small velvet box he was holding. The air disappeared from her lungs. Ethan slowly opened the box, revealing a simple but incredibly beautiful ring. "I don't want a world where you're not there, Lily." Tears filled her eyes. "Ethan, I want you. I want Noah. I want Lucas picking on me when I make a mistake. I want the simple nights at our house, the messy breakfasts, the life we've built together without even realizing it." Lily put her hand to her mouth, feeling her chest explode with emotion. "Will you marry me?" She laughed through her tears, not hesitating for a second. "Yes." Ethan slid the ring onto her finger before pulling her into his arms, kissing her as if the world depended on it. At that moment, nothing else mattered. There were no judgments, no doubts. There was only love, and that was all they needed. And so Ethan and Lily proved that true love overcomes any obstacle. They faced trials, fears, and doubts, but in the end, they chose each other. Now we want to know, what score from 0 to 10 would you give this story? Leave a comment and tell us what moved you the most. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to our channel to support our work. This helps us to bring you more stories like this. And before you leave, watch the video that appears on the screen. We're sure you'll enjoy it.